This is class 21 from the junior high school. They're about to compete in a relay race. The runners leading her class to victory. Just a few days before this, Aki had transferred to this school. His seat was beside Not. In class, she showed him a drawing, but he ended up crying. At recess, other classmates tried to check on him, but Aki pushed them away, repeatedly telling them to leave him alone. So the more they tried, the more distant he became. Feeling overwhelmed, he ran out of the classroom. Natsuko skipped class to follow him and asked why he refused to be friends with anyone. She suspected he had gone through something tough, but he didn't enjoy the event with his classmates. Aki hesitated but eventually agreed. Later, he overheard that Natsuko, always cheerful and outgoing, had lost her parents in an accident. So Aki couldn't understand why someone who had gone through such pain wasn't as sad as him. So during the sports festival, Aki had fun and began to hope he could find happiness again. But no matter how hard he tried, something wouldn't let him escape. That something was the King's Game. The King's Game rules were simple but terrifying. A mysterious figure known as the King sent messages to the class. Anyone who failed to quitting the game was not an option. So next morning, Aki arrived at school to find that everyone had received a message from the King. The command this time was for Aki and Natsuko to kiss, leading the class to believe Aki was behind. Aki genuinely liked Natsuko and offered to help him. She even offered to give him Natsuko's number. However, Aki apologized for how he had spoken to her earlier and sent her away. That night, he sat alone on the basketball court, contemplating his fate. He wondered if it would be easier just to end everything, but then questioned whether he should bring Natsuko down with him. Natsuko found Aki at the court, and thinking he was still upset about the day's events, offered to let him kiss her. As the time ticked down, he mentioned that he did, but she was no longer around. As the last minute approached, Natsuko climbed over the fence, determined to help. She kissed Aki, completing the command, much to his surprise. Natsuko then revealed she had liked him for a long time and wanted to date him. Just when Aki thought the ordeal was over, a new message from the King arrived. This time, the command was for Satoshi, the classmate who had exposed Aki inside. The student's father thought Aki was an intruder and tried to stop him, but Aki managed to get to the student in time, preventing him from committing suicide. He told the father to call for an ambulance before running back to meet the others. By then, more students had been punished. Those who were still alive gathered at a park, but Satoshi continued to accuse Aki of being the one behind the game. The real horror began when it was revealed that the penalized students had actually hanged themselves, and some people had witnessed it firsthand. Aki admitted that he had once been a part of the King's Game before, and everyone except for him. Amai, furious because Aki had hesitated to kiss Natsuko earlier, thinking he wanted to drag her down with him, lashed out at him and hit him. So the rest of the class began calling Aki a murderer, and Amy even. The class turned violent, beating Aki up. In the chaos, someone broke a rule and was suddenly punished, bleeding heavily before exploding into pieces. The next command came, ordering Natsuko to sleep with another classmate. She refused, saying she wanted her first time to be with someone she loved. But Aki coldly told her that it was her decision to make with the other classmate. Aki's mind drifted back to his previous class. But when the punishment came and two students were ordered to sleep together, Aki still thought it was a prank, until both were found dead the next morning. The chaos that followed was indescribable. In the current class, suspicion began to grow. A girl with white hair named Ria caught Aki's attention as she quietly observed the situation and forbade the bespectacled boy, the target of the command, from touching his girlfriend, even threatening to beat him up. Aki tried to calm him down, but the boyfriend was as expected and had been completed. The girlfriend was worried about what kind of punishment might fall on them, but Aki was sure he wouldn't follow the next command. So the following morning, as Aki and his friend Naoto walked to school, they saw the next command. The boyfriend was given the right to issue a command to anyone in the class. Aki tried to intervene, but the boyfriend used his command privilege to order the bespectacled boy to hang himself. Horrified, the bespectacled boy ran away, heartbroken, of becoming a singer, and the bespectacled boy revealed he also had aspirations of being a musician. Meet up at his house to play music, jamming together with the bespectacled boy's electric guitar. So as the clock neared midnight, tension built. They waited anxiously for what might happen. When the clock struck 12, they were relieved that the bespectacled boy hadn't hanged himself. He left to get some water, and while Aki was talking to his girlfriend on the phone, Naoto suddenly told him that the command had been fulfilled. Only to discover him hanging. Aki tried to stop her, but Natsuko called him a hypocrite, accusing him of wanting her dead earlier, yet now talking about survival. She dragged him into the woods to speak in private. She accused him of betraying his friends in the past just to save himself. In a twisted move, she started screaming, falsely accusing Aki of trying to assault her. The others, believing Natsuko, rushed in and began beating him mercilessly as Aki was being attacked, revealing that another classmate had received an order to send death messages to 2 people. And Natsuko wanted one of those messages sent to Aki, ensuring his death. Everyone now saw Natsuko for who she truly was, a completely different person from the one they thought they knew. Aki hoped desperately that someone would step in to save him. Just then, a young man named Kenta arrived, seeing a dead classmate on the ground and Aki being assaulted by the others. Kenta was the only one brave enough to defend Aki. Natsuko, seeing this, ordered the girl with the phone to send death messages to both Aki and Kenta. However, the girl hesitated, no longer recognizing the Natsuko she once knew. Aki asked her to send him one of the death messages and the other to Natsuko, but the girl couldn't go through with it and threw her phone away, terrified of the consequences. Kenta decided to take Aki and the girl with him, and she asked to join them, fearing what might happen if she stayed. Suko, enraged, demanded to come along, but Kenta slapped her and led Aki and the girl away. The girl was still terrified, thinking she would die soon, but Kenta revealed he had the power to give any order. He planned to use that privilege to protect her, knowing that if he failed, they would both face death. On their way, Kenta asked Aki to explain everything, so Aki began recounting the story from the very beginning, explaining how the king's game had followed him ever since he arrived. Kenta wanted to hear more, so Aki continued, describing how he first realized the game was real after putting on the glasses of death. So the following morning, a new command had been issued. One female classmate would be chosen by votes, and whoever received the fewest votes would die. Saoki couldn't let his best friend die, so he pleaded with his girlfriend to help sway the vote. His girlfriend, who had been pressured by both Aki and his friend, finally agreed to assist Aki, as if she owed him a favor. Meanwhile, another girl in the class, unable to accept her impending death, resorted to dirty tactics to win votes. She tried to seduce the boys in the class, but her boyfriend found out. In a moment of reflection, the boyfriend apologized to Aki for what had happened earlier. Aki, understanding the weight of the situation, didn't hold a grudge. He admitted that he had made mistakes too, especially by not paying attention to the glasses wearer before the last moment. For when the time came to tally the votes, everyone was on edge. Aki read each vote aloud, and the results were extremely close. So the girl who had tried to manipulate the situation began to panic. When the final vote was read, she eagerly grabbed it and declared herself the winner, relieved to see her name. But when Aki read it again, her name was only there as an apology, as the person had voted for someone else. Realizing her fate, the girl went mad and threw herself out of the window, unable to accept the outcome. Ironically, her punishment had only been to confess her feelings to the person she liked, not death. She was taken to the hospital, her condition critical, and Aki wasn't sure if she would survive the night. So later, Aki confessed to Kenta that he had rigged the vote. He had secretly messaged those who were bribed, promising them a way out of the game if they followed his plan. He knew that if anyone found out, he'd be beaten within an inch of his life, but he had taken the risk sending out a private message only those involved knew about. So if they revealed his plan, it would expose their betrayal and indirectly lead to the girl's death, so they remained silent. Saki knew the consequences could have been disastrous, but he was willing to do whatever it took to survive, even if it meant facing his own punishment. Upon arriving back home, Aki's group sat down to discuss their next move. Suddenly, news came that the girl in the hospital had passed away, which meant her command had been passed on to someone else. Now Aki's best friend Naoda had to sleep with a girl before midnight or face a gruesome punishment, being burned alive. With only 10 minutes left, Aki, desperate to save his friend, threw his girlfriend and Naoda into a room, hoping they would go through with it. Aki was willing to forgive everything to protect his best friend, but Naoda fiercely refused, unwilling to betray both Aki and his girlfriend. But he preferred to die rather than hurt the 2 people closest to him. In a fit of panic, Aki knocked Naoda unconscious, allowing his girlfriend to take his place. So after 12 agonizing hours with no penalty message received, both Noah and Aki's girlfriend hugged each other, sobbing, heartbroken over what they had been forced to do. When Kenta heard Aki's story, he couldn't bring himself to blame him. Not everyone had the strength to make such a difficult decision. Kenta was furious at the king, convinced that whoever was behind the game was a monster. Meanwhile, Natsuko gathered the remaining players, intent on controlling them. She noticed Kenta had left his phone behind and plotted to use this against him. Later, Kenta realized he had forgotten his phone at the park and went back to retrieve it, telling Aki to head to the hospital. But Aki had other plans. He wanted to visit a village. Everyone in the village had died, leaving it abandoned. Aki hoped that by investigating this place, they could find clues on how to escape the game. Kenta and their friend Mai agreed to go with him. The next morning they boarded a train, and Aki asked Mai if she had brought her old phone, in case they needed it. Despite Natsuko's threats to know who the king was, years ago Aki had suspected the king was someone from his class. Back then, a brave female classmate had volunteered to touch every person in the class to see if the completion message would appear. She believed ground, wanting only to help him and the others. The next morning the test to identify the king began. Everyone admired the girl's courage as she risked her life to find the truth. She began touching each person, one by one, starting with the boys, but nothing happened. When it was time for the girls, Aki grew suspicious of a girl named Ria. Ria brazenly declared herself as the king. If none of them were the king, someone would die. The brave girl panicked, feeling the weight of her decision, and fled. Aki's girlfriend urged him to follow her, as Aki blamed himself for giving her false hope by suggesting the king was in their class. Aki searched everywhere, eventually remembering the spot people went when they wanted to be alone. He found the girl there crying. He comforted her, trying to reassure her that the penalty might not be severe. She blamed herself for being useless and unable to help, but Aki took the blame upon himself, feeling guilty for leading her into danger. As midnight approached, the girl, sensing her end was near, feelings to Aki, her voice soft and full of sadness. Then, the clock struck midnight. The penalty arrived, and although the girl didn't die, the punishment was cruel. She was sentenced to lose something important. The girl, aware of Aki's situation, secretly contacted his girlfriend to find out more about this command. When Aki couldn't find the girl, he frantically searched for her, calling Nawada for assistance. Just then, the girl called him herself. She had learned about Aki's new order and asked if she was what he valued most. Aki admitted that she was important to him, but joked he could always go home and break his belongings instead. However, the girl, now blind, confessed that her new reality was far worse than she'd expected, and that she too, lost in despair. Sharia soon appeared, mocking the girl, determined to prevent their friend Cory from meeting a tragic end. Overwhelmed by the mounting losses of his friends, Aki spiraled deeper into despair. Suddenly, Dozo called. With a new lead, he had found a strange character that appeared in every penalty message sent to the victims. He asked Aki to send the messages from the deceased girl's phone for further investigation, and mentioned that Ria seemed suspicious, knowing far too much about the game. Dosu shared that Ria had once been a cheerful, social person, but after suffering abuse at the hands of her biological father, she had changed completely. He asked Aki to watch over Cory if something happened to him. So the next about the village connected to the king's game. But before Aki could fully grasp this new information, Dosu revealed that he had cried, sealing his fate. Determined to send Aki the details before his penalty, Dosu struggled to click the mouse on his computer. But before he could finish, one of his hands was brutally severed. Cory called Dosu during this chaotic moment, but he couldn't answer. The penalty struck again, taking his other hand. Moments later, his body was torn apart. When Aki tried calling Cory, he lied, telling her that Dosu was fine, warning her not to cry or read any messages from the game. With this new weight on his shoulders, Aki set off to the cursed village. So in front of him stood Cory, holding a knife, her eyes filled with anger. She accused him of lying and causing Dusui's death. Convinced that Aki was the king, Aki, despite the danger, explained that he had lied to protect Dusui's last wish. So he knew both Cory and Dusui had feelings for each other, and that Dusui had planned to confess his love for her once the game began to fall. In that moment, she suffered a heart attack and collapsed, dying in front of Aki. Before he could react, Ria showed up, impressed with how well Aki managed to control his emotions. She demanded to know what information Dusui had given him before he died. So meanwhile, in the real world, Mai had decided to switch to a new phone. Note they had to select one person to roll a dice. The number rolled would determine how many students would be punished, including the person who rolled. If no one rolled, everyone would be punished. Panic spread quickly among the students, and no one knew what to do. Suddenly, Ria sent a message to the class, inviting them to the park to roll the dice. To suffer, stepped forward to roll the dice, and their worst fears were realized. It landed on 6. This meant 6 people, including Nawada, would be punished. Instantly, the boy's head twisted violently, and he died. The mood shifted, and trust among the classmates crumbled. Nawada continued, choosing 2 girls that the bully hated, but he still needed to pick 2 more. Both Aki and Nawada's girlfriend begged him to choose them to spare the others, but just as Nawada was about to decide, the bully to save the others. Impressed by his courage, Nawada immediately called out their names. In the end, 6 lives were lost. Though afraid, Naoto was relieved to have saved his 2 best friends. His punishment was brutal. His arms were severed, followed by his legs. In his final moments, Naoto spoke his last words to Aki before dying in his arms. So afterward, out self-inflicted punishments. Ria believed the virus was triggered through the messages, and using Dusui's data, she began working on a program to block the signal that activated the punishments. Just as Ria felt confident she had cracked the code, the king activated her punishment. She was engulfed in flames, burning alive. Even as the fire consumed her, Ria remained eerily calm. In the present, Aki, Kenta, and Mai Dukai had finally reached the abandoned village. So the main entrance was blocked, but they found the girl was doomed. By sacrificing them, they could save Mai Dukai. Aki, now hardened by everything he'd been through, agreed, feeling he couldn't compare the life of an elderly woman to that of a child. As they discussed, Mai Dukai mentioned that the other end of the tunnel wasn't blocked off, likely because the authority's house. He felt a chill run down his spine. Among the dusty papers, he discovered a letter from her father, apologizing to his daughter. And this made Aki suspect that her father had somehow been involved in the king's game. Kenta suddenly noticed that Mai Dukai had vanished. He frantically started searching for her, but instead received messages on his phone. Shining his flashlight in the direction the photo had landed, Aki saw a dried-up corpse. Examining the photo more closely, he realized it was of a young man who bore a striking resemblance. Could Natsuko have participated in the king's game before? Meanwhile, Kenta and Mai Dukai had a heartfelt moment as they stood alone. Feelings had clearly developed between them during their time together. Mai Dukai decided to send one message to herself and another to Natsuko, who had once forced her to try and kill Kenta. She hoped that by sending a message to herself, she could protect Kenta from being punished. She confessed her love for him, but before she could run away, Kenta stopped her, admitting he felt the same. Though overjoyed, she wished to die alongside Kenta to escape the nightmare they were trapped in. Kenta, however, refused to give in. He reminded her that they had to keep living in hope. He couldn't share the same wish. As she turned to leave, Kenta stopped her again and carried her to an area where they could get a phone signal. He decided to send the message to himself, choosing to sacrifice his own life to save hers. Kenta felt guilty for not being able to continue the journey with Aki, but believed this was the only way to protect Mai Dukai. His decision would be, which involved ignorance. Thinking that would satisfy the dog was truly her most precious, but it was a cruel and tragic realization for her, face the penalty. Kenta, realizing he couldn't protect her, chose to stay by Mai Dukai's side. As the effects of the penalty began to take hold, Kenta could no longer face Aki. He asked Aki to give them some time, so she regained consciousness. The pain of the penalty ravaged her body. She reached out for Kenta, but before their hands could meet, both of them passed away. Aki returned shortly after and carefully placed their hands together, allowing them to be united in death. Just then, he received a call from Natsuko, who was following the king's orders on horseback, as she had called deliberately to provoke him, before Aki could ask her anything, and that acting rashly would be dangerous. Meanwhile, Teru, the boy who had recently been with Natsuko, had come to realize how evil she was. He knew she intended to kill Aki and everyone else, so he planned to stop her. However, Natsuko discovered his intentions and banged on his door, ready to confront him. Teru scrambled to do something, but before he could act, Natsuko had already snatched his phone. Amy, who had been hiding out mutated characters in the king's orders, which seemed to be beyond the king's control. Aki realized this could be the key to escaping the game and confirmed that Ria's theory about the mutated letters was correct. Determined, he decided he needed to gather clues from the previous victims. Suddenly, a classmate named Ryana called Aki, saying she had important information and asked him to come to her house. Aki agreed and promised to arrive by noon. When he got there, Ryona's house to avoid being seen by her parents. They went to the nearby park where Ryona's name, and in his agitation, asked Ryona what she knew. When he quickly apologized for his outburst, and Ryona explained that Ria had left behind notes about the mutated characters found in the king's messages. Natsuko had been investigating the phones of those who had died, likely knowing about these mutations as well. Suspicious of Natsuko's actions, Ryona had taken detailed notes. Aki shared his own findings from Natsuko's father's notes, realizing that the mutated characters in both sets of notes matched. He was encouraged by the thought that the sacrifices of his friends had not been in vain, and that they were closer to uncovering the truth. Suddenly, Natsuko appeared, finding both Aki and Ryona. They were unsure why she had come, but Aki had a personal question to ask her. He directly confronted Natsuko about her identity. She was his girlfriend's older sister. So Natsuko, unfazed, understood that Aki was trying to use their connection to appeal to her emotions, but she coldly told him that it wouldn't work. She was far too deep in the game to be swayed by any personal ties. Natsuko wanted Aki to come to the gathering spot, because the latest order would get simple but brutal. All remaining students had to sit in a circle. Each right-hand finger added 1 point, while multiple people, and in the end, anyone with negative points would be punished. It sounded complicated, but it became clearer once they started. Aki and Rana arrived at the gathering place. Aki was relieved to see Teru still alive. Though Teru seemed achy, he would have to break a right finger to avoid going into the negative. The mere thought of it made everyone cringe in pain. There were 11 people left in the game. If Amy decided to break a finger and assign points, someone would be doomed. Teru stood up and urged everyone to make peace. He spoke to Aki and told him to trust them, as they had decided to skip their turns. Aki, uncertain but hopeful, agreed and skipped his turn, as did another classmate. 2 more people skipped their turns, making Natsuko uneasy. The atmosphere in the group was too calm, and she sensed something was wrong. Then, it was Teru's turn. He stood up and asked Aki for a favor. He wanted to cut Aki's hair. But Teru reassured Aki, telling him that he would explain afterward. Teru situation. As Natsuko's patient Teru, after finishing the haircut, Teru asked Aki if he liked the style. When Aki said yes, Teru immediately broke one of his right-hand fingers. He had made an agreement with the class earlier, showing Natsuko that her threats couldn't control everyone. As soon as he finished speaking, Teru pushed Aki aside and grabbed a rock. He smashed his left hand, forcing her to break 5 of her own fingers to balance the score. Caught off guard by Teru's bold move, would play out, believing that their bones would eventually heal. And now, with Teru having emerged as a reliable leader, the group needed him more than ever. 3 more people in a row skipped their turns, leaving only Amy, negative point, as a test to see if Natsuko would be willing to sacrifice something for her. The Natsuko showed that level of loyalty. Amy had been prepared to break 4 of her own fingers to save Natsuko. But in the end, Natsuko thought of Amy that she could still save her, appealing to their past friendship and promises. Despite everything, Amy still rushed to protect Natsuko, pushing Aki away. Aki was just scared, acting out of desperation. In her mind, Natsuko's actions were driven by fear, who had lost all sense of loyalty. Amy had kept 4 positive points to help Natsuko, but Natsuko suddenly seized Amy's hand and broke her last finger to take the remaining positive points for herself. The game officially ended there, and Aki confronted Natsuko, blaming her for never changing. But Natsuko coldly responded that even if she changed, it wouldn't make a difference. She claimed the game she had experienced was different from Aki's. Teru later returned, his left hand permanently damaged. Despite everything, he expressed no. But Natsuko wasn't convinced. She believed they were putting false trust in each other, as there was no hope in a game designed for death. Natsuko had once hoped to save someone important to her, but when that person left, she decided she'd rather kill others than offer false hope. Suddenly, a new game began, and without warning, Teru was punished. Blood started pouring from his neck, and no one could understand why. Natsuko revealed that she had taken Teru had lost his dream. Deep down, he wanted to die, and she had merely granted him that wish. In a shocking twist, Amy, who had been loyal to Natsuko all along, now followed her without question, leaving Aki unsure of what was right or wrong anymore. When Ryo returned, struggling to comprehend what had happened, he tried to wake Teru, asking Aki why Teru wasn't responding, unable to face the reality of his death. The next command arrived. The group had to reach the mountaintop, and every 8 hours, the person furthest from the goal would be punished. No vehicles were allowed. As soon as the game began, everyone started running, except for Aki, Rana, and Ryo, who hadn't moved yet. Aki tried to help Ryo face reality, telling him not to let Teru's spirit be troubled anymore. So Riona decided to go ahead with Ryo, which made Amy ask him to put her down. Realizing her mistake, Amy decided to run on her own. Meanwhile, among those running ahead, a classmate pulled down on a blonde boy who was blocking their way, and ran for a while, hoping to stay ahead of the next punishment. Riona and Amy had a heartfelt conversation about how hard Aki was trying to keep them going. Although Aki ran fast, he kept deciding to leave Amy with the group. Aki turned back. He soon met up with Riona again and noticed that she struggled to open the water can due to her long nails, so he helped her. He might not make it in time to avoid punishment. The 3 of them sat down to rest for a moment, and in a brief daze, Aki mistook Riona for his ex-girlfriend, reaching out to her. Riona scolded him, snapping him back to reality. Suddenly, the blonde boy lost consciousness and collapsed. Aki rushed to help, trying to pull him back up, but the weight was too much, and Aki was being pulled down too. Just as Aki was on the verge of giving up, memories of Kenta and Teru came to him, encouraging him to keep fighting. On his mind, he even saw his girlfriend reaching out to help. Aki managed to pull himself back and met up with Riona again. He was so worried about him that she started to cry. They swam to shore. He urged him to stay strong and continue running, reminding him that they still had 4 islands to cross before reaching the goal. If the blonde boy hadn't been counted for punishment, it would have been them. As the time for the first punishment approached, she slapped him in frustration, knowing that he had risked his own life for her. Aki pretended he knew the blonde boy would still be counted, brushing off the seriousness of what he had done. Despite being angry, Rihanna let it go, and they continued onward. The head Amy's group was still running. Meanwhile, Aki and Ramal were trailing behind, and with only minutes left until the next punishment, Iki knew one of them would have to take it. He suggested they settle it with a game of rock, paper, scissors, knowing that Rihanna would protest if he volunteered himself. Aki won the game, but when Rihanna tried to take the punishment, Aki argued that as the winner, he should choose, and he wanted to stay behind. Rihanna, not backing down, kicked him in the groin and ran ahead. As Rihanna ran, she stumbled from exhaustion. She asked Aki about his ex-girlfriend, curious to know what kind of person had fallen for him. She admitted that she wanted to be his girlfriend and hoped he would stay with her a little longer. Apologizing for holding him back, she allowed him to run ahead while she rested. Meanwhile, in Rio's group, he was crying, realizing that Amy was the one who would receive the punishment next. Amy had run off, avoiding the path Aki and Raya were taking. She had been inspired by Aki and decided to sacrifice her life to save his. Deep down, Amy still held on to hope that Natsuko would change. When the punishment came, Aki returned to Rihanna, informing her that Amy had died. After expecting Rihanna to kick him again in frustration, he was surprised when she instead held his hand and cried. This moment reminded him of his ex-girlfriend, and as they ran, Aki asked Rihanna if she wanted to hear the rest of the story about the previous game. Aki began recounting what happened after the dice game and Ria's death. 12 hours later, the final order came. Either he or his girlfriend had to kill the person they loved the most. This meant one of them would survive. His girlfriend handed him a knife, urging him to do it, but Aki refused, wanting them both to live. Unwilling to let Aki die, his girlfriend stabbed herself. Aki tried to stop her, but it was too late, and he had to watch as the person he loved most passed away in his arms. Even as the last survivor, the king made him choose, continue the game or be punished. Meanwhile, Natsuko had reached the finish line first. She waited to see how many others would make it. The boy who had pushed the blonde guy earlier arrived and, seeing a sign, followed it. However, he stepped into a trap set by Natsuko, who then appeared and broke his leg, ensuring fewer people would reach the finish. Another girl, Duna, arrived at the same junction, but found no sign to guide her. Tsuko appeared and gave her directions, but Duna, not trusting her, took the other path. So Natsuko had actually pointed correctly, knowing Duna wouldn't trust her. Aki and Riona eventually met up with Rio and a girl with glasses. They told them the others had gone ahead. Meanwhile, a girl named Rina had been running endlessly without finding the way and came across the boy with the broken leg. He begged for help, but Rina refused, wanting him to understand what the blonde boy had gone through. She then ran off and met Duna again, who had gotten lost after mistrusting Natsuko. Deciding to give Natsuko's directions a try, Duna took the correct path. However, she suddenly slipped and almost fell off the mountain. Rina saw this but hesitated to help, afraid of being pulled down as well. Rina eventually reached the finish line and met Natsuko again. But Natsuko didn't want anyone else to survive and began to mess with Rina's mind, causing her to hallucinate images of the people she had left behind. So Rina, overwhelmed, backed away and slipped, falling off the mountain. Aki's group, hearing cries for help, ran to investigate but only had 1 minute left before the punishment. Natsuko blocked their way, so Aki charged into her, giving Riona and Rio enough time to reach the finish line. So both made it, followed by Aki and the girl with glasses, just in time. Rio checked and found that only 5 people had made it to the finish line. 3 people who should have been ahead had died. So realizing that Natsuko was behind their deaths, Rio was suddenly knocked unconscious by Aki. The day's order was to create a human figure by cutting off limbs and heads. Rio intended to sacrifice himself, following in Teru's footsteps, and had knocked Aki out to prevent him from interfering. Natsuko handed Rio a chainsaw, and he began cutting into his own leg, but the pain became too much, and he died before completing the task. When the girl with glasses woke up and saw Rio dead, she tried to strangle Natsuko in a fit of rage, but Natsuko quickly killed her. Sonitsuka then turned her attention to Riona, planning to eliminate her as well. Riona called out for Aki, and when he regained consciousness, she explained the horrible order Rio had followed. She couldn't understand why he had gone through with it. Aki realized that. To Rio, proving his strength was everything, but to Aki, Rio had already shown his bravery through his perseverance and encouragement of others. The order to create a human figure was now nearly complete, with only 1 more death required. Aki, still holding on to hope, suggested cooperating with Natsuko to escape the game. Riona showed Natsuko the clues from the letters they had found, which connected to similar clues Natsuko had uncovered at her old school. However, Natsuko had only collected this information for her own survival and never intended to defeat the king or end the game. Together, they pieced the letters together and realized the horrible truth. The game would continue as long as there were survivors. The only way the game would end was if everyone died. Aki realized they were never meant to survive, but Natsuko didn't care. So all she wanted was to ensure her own survival, even if the game continued. She decided that Aki would be the first to die. Grabbing him, she began to strangle him. Riona tried to help but was kicked aside. Natsuko choked Aki until he foamed at the mouth, but Riona grabbed the saw and rushed to stab Natsuko. So Riona claimed that Aki was hers and that no one else could hurt him. She wanted Aki to focus on her, as it was thanks to him that she had survived this long. Despite the brutal fight, Natsuko managed to stay alive, lunging at Aki once more and cutting into his neck with the saw. She admitted that she also liked Aki but would rather die with him than let someone else take him. Riona, desperately trying to save Aki, attempted to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. As Aki lay dying, he hoped Riona would live well after he was gone. In the real world, Riona dragged Aki's body to the beach. She knew it was selfish, but she preferred to die with him rather than continue living alone. She kissed Aki and then took his body into the sea with her, ending the royal game for them. But far away, at another school, the game had begun again. In the end, nothing had truly been resolved, and the cycle continued.